I'm the director of Indiana University Press, and my name is Gary Dunham. I've been a publisher for 22 years. In 1995, I became the first editor of American Indian Studies at the University of Nebraska Press. I became the director there eventually. Then I was the director of the State University of New York Press, then the director of publications at the American Speech Language Hearing Association in D.C., and then I came back into the university world, and it's where I am now in Bloomington, Indiana, which of course has a fine effort working with Folklore. And so we're very pleased as a press to also be doing many new books in Folklore. But it's not about me, it's about the process of publishing. I've been giving this lecture on how to publish workshop on how to publish, how to get your first book published for about 20 years. And you have to think back then, we really didn't have this kind of slideshow sort of thing. I memorized the talk, and I would walk just back and forth and freak everyone out because I tended to walk behind them as I was speaking. And then I realized after a while that it was being very stressful for everyone in the workshop. So I decided to throw them all up on a PowerPoint for you all to take a look at. So let's talk about publishing. It's not a product. Publishing is not, from your point of view and from my point of view, it's not about the final thing that is spit out at the end of this process. It is about a process by which you have two separate journeys. The journey that you are on, where you are a scholar, you want to write a book, you want to share all the research that you have. You go out and you find not just a press, but an editor that you can work with. And as I always tell the editors that I train, we need to keep in mind that when we speak with an author for the first time, they've often have had this book inside of them for a decade. Sometimes it's 5 years. I've worked with an author who had started working on their book 18 years ago. So obviously what we have to think about is while we can get you, we know the ropes and we can take you to the finish line, we have to think about the fact that you have an emotional investment. You have a lifetime investment in your work, and we have to be respectful of that. And we need to be thinking about that very seriously as editors, as all of the people who work at a publishing house. On the other hand, when you seek out a publisher, also need to let it go a little bit. You need to step back and say, I'm coming to the people who are the experts, who know the marketplace. They know how to make a book happen. They've done it over and over again. Thus, we have to learn to work as a team. We have to learn to trust each other. And boy, can that be a hard thing to do. Think about it. You probably in your head, if you're working on a manuscript, you've already got a sense of what the title is going to be. You've got a sense of what that cover is going to be. And then suddenly you have to share it for the first time with folks who don't even know you. It's a really scary thing. And I have published alone. I've acquired, last count was about 1,100 books. So and you have to think about all the other books that I haven't published that we went through the process and we had to turn down. So I've done this a lot. And sometimes for monographs, it seems like the same old, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that the Academy tends to generate often the same type of book. It just has different things in it. But every experience is unique because there's a human being on that end that I get to work with, and I get to have that experience of taking something that they've researched, that they've created, and we make something as a team that's going to outlast all of us. Just think about that. 100 years from now, when we're long gone, the books that we're working on are still going to be there. We hope, assuming that we still have civilization as we know it. Over the last year, I don't know. But we will all find out about that. And I never would have said that last year. Isn't that amazing? I wonder why that's the case. Okay, so let's talk about how to get your work published. And I believe they're going to be publishing, they're going to make available these slides if you want to take some notes, because I tend to go off script a lot because I've got a lot of stories. I don't know if you want to write any of them down. I wouldn't. I would just listen and decide for yourself. But there's a lot to know because I want to make this process as transparent as possible, and I want to explain it systematically from the time when you're thinking about getting published to the point when you've suddenly have that book at the end of the process. So let's start here. Let me make sure I can. Okay, this is my big pet peeve, and it really irritates me, and that is, obviously publishing is the cornerstone of the academy. It's the cornerstone of fields. We have to share our work, our research, through articles and books, right? I mean, and we've been taught that as we're writing a dissertation, is that you got to get it out there. You got to get it out there. Well, then why in the hell isn't it taught in a systematic, detailed way in graduate school? I went to UVA. I got my PhD in archaeology there, and never once did we ever talk about how to share the research in the marketplace. You would think that not only the sponsoring of research, but the dissemination of research should be an important part of the learning process, of the training process. Some places it is a little bit now, but it still really isn't. And so often I've seen cases where someone works on their dissertation for 5 to 7 years, and then when they reach me, we all realize it's really not what it needs to be, and they have to kind of rewind everything and start again, at least on some parts of it. That seems like a colossal waste of time. It also is the fact, if you're thinking of your dissertation as a book, then you're automatically going to be framing it in terms of what we're looking for. We're looking for in terms of marketplace significance, and so on and so forth, and how long is it, and how expensive is it going to be. I don't get this, and I've said this for years, and I think it's getting through a little bit, but you often get people who sponsor you who are very smart senior scholars who don't know anything about publishing, even though they publish a number of times, and they tell younger scholars the wrong information. So let me just say this to you right up front. Anything you've probably heard about how to get a book published is probably just a bunch of bullshit. So we're going to try just to put that all aside. Let's start again. Now, there are many ways to the top of that mountain, but I'm going to talk to you about one that I think of as middle of the road that will include lots of different ways to get published. So let's continue. Okay, this is the big thing. When are you ready to seek a publisher? Is it at the point when you have a kernel of an idea and you want to sit down and go over it? Well, as a first-time scholar, probably not, because you need to flesh it out a bit more. When? It's when you own your book project. And this is something that I've trained my editors to do. If you talk to the editors from Indiana while you're here, all the editors from Illinois and so on, they're all going to ask you to be framing it as a whole. And that's a way for us to evaluate whether you have a handle on everything. I know that when I was working on my first book manuscript, the dissertation, I was thinking of it a chapter at a time. It was a sequence, and I didn't even write up a table of contents. I created it as I went along, and you'd be surprised how many people still do that. So when you understand your project as a whole, what is it about? I'm going to be driving this point home again and again. You got to be able to summarize what your book is about in a sentence, and I don't mean a sentence with a lot of semicolons. I mean a sentence. You need to be as specific as possible. You need to know what the driving theme of your book is. It is god-awful for an editor when someone approaches us and we ask, so what is your book about? And the person clears their throat and starts talking. And then 20 minutes later, we've kind of figured it out, but then we're thinking, if you ramble that much and explaining something that's near in your heart and in your research, what is your book looking like? It's probably all over the place and unorganized. So you need to be crisply defining what it is. Why does it matter? Because the significance is something that you've been explaining a lot, but the significance for a committee of 5 is not going to be the same as a significance for an entire field of folklorists, right? Know its audience. Think about the type of prose that you need to reach your audience. The worst thing that you can do as well, and I'm giving you all these don'ts, right? When you go to an editor and they say, who's the audience? And you say, well, basically everybody. Everyone's going to love this. We don't want to hear that. We want to know that you've thought about a marketing segment. What type of folklorist is going to be interested? If there's some spillover into anthropology, for example, we want to hear about it, but the primary focus of a publisher is to reach out and prioritize basically one marketing segment. So you need to be thinking about that. Really key, have a working table of contents in hand, because we're going to want to see as a whole how you're thinking about explaining what you love and and how you're going to be moving through the argument and the presentation. All right, what's the content vehicle? You know, that's a term that we use a lot in publishing now. Are you envisioning this book as digital only? Are you envisioning this book as in print only? Are you thinking of it as something a little bit more interesting in terms of multimedia online as well, in terms of a network digital monograph? Those things need to be thought of at the very beginning when you're talking with a publisher to assess whether they would agree with you or not, or whether even technologically they can do the type of book that you want to do. I never would have had this conversation 20 years ago. It was always just about a print book. You need to know its approximate length. Are you talking about a 1,000-page manuscript? Well, then get out of here. Not necessarily. Some manuscripts I've taken are 1,000 pages. That's because the virtue of the subject matter says it's a virtue to be comprehensive, such as the archaeology of the Northeast. It's got to be a big book, otherwise no one's going to take it seriously. But in most cases, you really want to control that length because it's tied to the cost of the book. Really get a sense of, are there going to be multimedia elements? Nowadays, I ask my editors from the start when they're working with an author to ask them, how do you think that people are not just going to read what you're doing, but experience what you're doing? Think about the huge difference between that. We've never asked those types of questions in publishing until the last few years. In terms of the constellation of how you want to move people through the research that you are sharing in terms of multimedia elements online and print, how do you see that being orchestrated? Because some publishers are going to look at you like, what the hell are you talking about? And others are going to go, yeah, we do a lot of books like that. And last, you have to think about this in terms of money. As an author doing their first book or their second book in a scholarly field, and if you're working with the university press, you're not going to make a lot of money, but you do need to think about that so no one is caught by surprise. Or do you simply want it to be open access and freely shared? Some publishers can't do that because they put a lot of cost into making the book, and they can't just give it away, sadly. I'd rather we could share everything, but it does cost a lot of money to make a book, to pay for people's salaries, and so on and so forth. So you've got to grasp all of this as a whole. You really need to be thinking about it. And you will be persuasive with an editor if you walk into a room and go, yeah, this is what I have. Or if they're asking you from an overview of the book and you explain all these different facets. Because we know that you're engaged with your work, that you've got a really good sense of where it's going to be going as we walk along that path together. What are the differences between a dissertation and a book? Well, we all know these things, but I have to go through them because I'm required by law. So let's do them. Okay, the dissertation has that review of literature. Why? Why, God, why? Because we always ask you to take it out. Why do you have to spend all that time? I do not know. That is one of the unexplained mysteries of the Academy, because you would think that outside of the dissertation itself, they would know that you know the field. Well, the other thing about a dissertation is that it always telegraphs and summarizes a lot. At the start of a chapter, you will always have this paragraph. In this chapter, I shall do the following. And at the end of the chapter, it'll be, in this chapter, I just did this. We don't need that. Your readers aren't stupid. Okay, you need to be graceful and fluid as you move from one part to the next, and assume that they will recall or they will flip back if they have some problems with a transition. The audience is committee, just a committee. My audience at UVA was 5 people. I'd rather write for an academy of 1,000 scholars or more. It may be a general audience. Discursive notes. How many times have you done so much research and you can't pack it all into the chapter, so thus you keep that argument going in those notes? That's a sign of a sloppy book that is rapidly escaping you, and you don't want to be that way. And we will be asking you to cut it. I once got a manuscript, and I can't describe it because it would give away who it is. Well, I've got a lot of those types of secrets. But this one was 700 plus pages long. 300 pages were discursive notes because this person had gone into the field, done amazing research. It's a great book, but just felt like that they had to share everything. Don't do it. Now, what you're going to do, and this is always the argument I get back, is you're going to point to a book by a senior scholar where they carry on these asides and so on in notes, and I will say that is the exception nowadays. Particularly for a junior scholar, you're really not going to get away with it. Just telling you. Theory scaffolding to the subject. I got a manuscript on anthropology 2 months ago where it took 113 pages before I actually reached the people they were talking about. What the hell happened there? Did the Academy just suddenly lose sight of its subject and decide to scaffold itself around it? There were human beings that were writing about in folklore. There were human beings were writing about in anthropology. You need to move them to the front. You need to move the true heart of a field to where people can be drawn in because they're interested in other people's lives. The Academy, the theory emerges from the subject. It illumines the subject. It does not bury it. And this is a terrible problem that's been affecting a lot of academic writing nowadays. And we've drawn the line at Indiana and said, if you're going to write in this way, find another publisher because we're not interested. And we've turned down some pretty leading scholars for that very reason, because we feel like we have a responsibility to the human heart of all of our fields to keep them at the center of what we write about. It's just awful, some of the stuff I've been seeing lately. And the focus, okay? Often dissertations can be really specialized. Sometimes that specialization is something that is a selling point, but often it can be really small, really focused. Think about the fact that you want to have a broader focus so other people working in other types of topics in folklore will be interested as well. Okay? What's the best way to publish a scholarly book? Boy, there were a lot of roads to the top of this one. Okay, self-publish. You can do that nowadays. It's not going to help you in terms of tenure, but if you don't give a damn about tenure, and more power to you, because I think it's an abominable system. Don't you like the way I share my opinions? But everyone knows that anyway. Then you should go ahead and own everything about your project. I've seen a number of scholars who have said, I don't agree with how you are treating this book. That thing follows me everywhere. And so then what I do is, if they're not happy with how the university press world is shaping their research or their expectations of their research, then I really encourage scholars to go ahead and publish on your own. Plenty of software tools at Lulu, Amazon, and other places allow you to format in a pretty good way and put it online. It's good. I mean, if you've got a small informal audience, and I do this a lot for these smaller manuscripts that are submitted to the press that are written by a grandmother and she's writing her family history. Well, you probably get 50 people maybe who are interested in that type of book. So that's a perfect venue for it. But understand this, is that this is not going to be recognized as a real thing by the Academy. We all know the problems with even my saying that sentence. There's no marketing at all. You have to do the marketing on your own. And you have to think about that. Yeah, you've got great research, but if you don't have a mechanism in place to let the world know about it, it's just going to kind of die in a quiet corner by itself. You'll have no copy editing or design help, and so you're on your own. But you do maintain creative control over everything. You could go to a commercial publisher, and if you've got a book that you think is going to sell, why the hell are you talking to me? I'm a university press. I'm a non-profit publisher. And that's great. Often you can get great visibility right away because they're known to the East Coast media. They're known worldwide. They have extensive marketing and sales channels. But this is what I hear again and again and again. Authors who work with them, unless you're a Stephen King, is that it's not a personal relationship. It really is a machine. And if you don't mind being a part of the Borg and being absorbed, then go for it, because you'll be happy in the collective, not me. You will have less creative input into the process, all right? And it will go out of print pretty quickly. I've picked up books that a commercial publisher thought wasn't worth doing after 3 years because sales had dropped to 5,000 a year. Oh my God, 5,000 a year is pretty good for all of us. So then we come to the university press, and that's another option, and that's a common one for people who want to share their research. And So let's talk about university presses. And here's some logos. Would you please tell me which one is which? They're all downstairs. Who's the one on the left? Thank you very much. I would have been really sad if you didn't recognize that. What about the next one? Come on. It's a sad. Okay, I'm not going to tell you. You have to go down and look. How about the next one? Next one? Last one? Wisconsin. So we've got this great unknown. Now, it could be that it's an awful logo and they should think of a better one that could be more recognizable. But I will leave it up to you to go and find out. There's over 100 university presses. We've been around for about 150 years. We vary, and the university press world doesn't recognize that they vary enough, in my view. I think there are 3 or 4 tiers of university presses. I'm not going to get into that. That's a sidetrack down a very wild path. But we do share a lot of characteristics in common. We are scholarly. We are on campuses. We have faculty boards. We'll be talking about that because that's going to be the lumen decider of your fate. It will be the faculty boards that approve all new original works of scholarship. We're nonprofit. That means that we love working with first-time authors. We will keep your book in print longer than anyone else because we have the right to do so, because we are sustained in part by money coming in from our host university, because the university itself sees their job to disseminate research as much as sponsor it. We each specialize in one or more scholarly areas. That's absolutely critical for you, as we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. Not all of us do the same thing. And you'd be surprised how many times I've had to say no to an excellent book submission simply because we don't publish in that area. And thus, we don't know the marketplace. Even downstairs, all those great publishers in folklore, we have specializations that aren't quite the same. And it's up to you to know what those lists are. Areas of specialization equals lists. Now, this is the key to getting published. And that is match up your subject of your manuscript with the list of the press. If you can't make that match happen from the beginning, don't go to that press, because they won't be interested. And if they were interested, and they still, and if they decided to work with you and accept the manuscript, they would not be able to market it effectively. So you need to understand lists across the board. We're all organized in more or less the same way. We have a director, we have an editor-in-chief, and we have a marketing team, and we have a production team, and they all work with you at various points of the process, as I'll explain in a minute. And we're all at a university. Some of these presses are run like little corporations, and then there are others which are run they're very small. They might have 5 individuals, and so everyone does everything. And some of them are more like what IU Press is. We're kind of in the middle, where we're fairly small, but we're big enough to be specialized, and so we each have our job to do on campus. Okay, this is the university press publishing process. This is how it works. These are the different teams. It isn't quite a linear sequence because marketing is involved the minute the contract happens at the beginning, but these are largely how university presses are organized. You have the acquisitions team. Those are the editors that are going to be acquiring. They have goals. They have to usually acquire 15 to 25 books a year, so they need you as much as you need them, but they would never tell you that, but I'll tell you that. Those are the people that you largely will be seeing at conferences like this. At very small presses, directors acquire as well, and sometimes directors at larger presses still have an interest in acquiring one area or the other. Once your manuscript is accepted for publication, you've rewritten it, and it's submitted to the press, it goes into copy editing. That's when the next group from manuscript editorial take over. They're going to be kind of overseeing the copy editing of the manuscript, the polishing of it. Then the physical manufacture of the book happens in terms of the design, layout, and then it's printed and put online. That's the production team. The marketing and sales team, as I said, they work with you at the end of the process, but they're involved in terms of coming up with marketing plans with acquisitions a year ahead of time. We all work very closely with each other, and if there's one team that breaks down, the whole process is in danger of not meeting its schedule, its deadline, and in terms of the quality of the product at the end of this. Okay, how do we decide? What's the process for deciding how we accept a manuscript? It's a vetting process that's pretty rigorous, and this is a general look at it. It varies by the press. But first of all, the acquisition editor that you're working with has to like it, think it makes sense. And we'll talk about what they're looking for in a minute. If it goes to the acquisition editor and they like it, their boss, their supervisor, the editor-in-chief, has to approve the project as well. So that's another layer of vetting. Then, if the project goes through the review process, the peer review process, and everything's positive, your project will be sent to the internal board of the press, where we have reps from every team meet. We look at your projects and decide, is it ready to go to the faculty board? And that's the faculty board in ominous black at the end. As I said, they're the power behind nearly everything when it comes to accepting scholarly manuscripts. Faculty board. Okay, how do I choose the right publisher for me? Okay, you're at a very special point in your lives where you've got something ready to share. How do you go about systematically doing it? And that's the thing. He said you don't want to make it random. You don't want to be frantic. Don't throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. God knows how many people do that. All right, be as methodical about this as research-wise, as focused as you were when you were writing the manuscript in the first place. Let's talk about it. A successful publishing experience depends upon 4 things. And this is what I talked about already, finding a publisher whose list will match what you're writing about. Okay, so you've got to know each of those publishers in the field and what they specialize in, and take a look at your own and say, what matches up, what fits? Secondly, and this is something that's really emerged in the last few years, find a publisher who has the technology, expertise, and track record to do the type of book that you want. If you're looking for a complex multimedia book online, there aren't a lot of publishers that can do that. That's going to narrow the types of publishers you're going to be working with. Third, you got to find a publisher whose faculty board supports the type of scholarship I am doing. Now, what I'm doing here is telling you that politics plays a great deal of a role when it comes to faculty boards. I'm not supposed to tell you that, but let's face it, the academy is political, and you have to understand some of those dynamics in order to survive. And fourth, this is probably the most important, find an acquisition editor you can work with as a partner in the publishing process. The concept of a partner in the publishing process works both ways. We want you to be a partner with us as well, because we have to trust each other and work with each other for a very long time. So, let us talk about each of these. Well, first of all, research the right press for me and my book, okay? It's extraordinarily important. I will say this again and again and again. Do not work in a vacuum. As you're finishing up the manuscript, really be researching the types of publishers that you want to reach out to. Okay, so the first thing, how do you find one? Look at your bookshelf. What books have you drawn upon in order to write the book that you're writing? Don't look at the title, don't look at the author, and this really was hard for me when I started being a publisher and not an academic. Go down to the bottom of the spine and see who the publisher is and look for the pattern. So I look at my shelf and I realize 4 books were published by Illinois in almost the same area, and they're recent. That might be a sign that they are interested in it. But you need to be looking for books that were published largely in the last 3 years. Now, why is that? That's because we bring books under contract that are going to be published in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now. And thus, the stuff that we're publishing here this year at IU, a lot of them we brought under contract 2 years ago. And you also have to understand that sometimes the directions of a press change due to the economy or due to an editor leaving and so on. So you need to really only be looking for the most recent books. Don't go back to the 1990s. Don't go back 10 years. Try to stay within 3 years. At the most, extend it back 5 years. All right. In the books, looking at the references in the books that are the most relevant, who are they citing? Again, it's about the publisher. Go to the press websites. If a press website is done well, and ours at IU Press is terrible, and that's why we're redesigning it. It looks like it was done about 20 years ago. you will see there they want to, as much as possible, illuminate the subject areas they are most interested in. You got to wade through the trade books. They're going to show you a lot of regional books that's supposed to make money. There's going to be some tradie books, but there'll be a list of series. There'll be a list of subject areas on the press websites that they are most interested in. That's another clue for you. Probably the most important is go to the right conferences. See which presses spent money to be here. Those presses down in that exhibit hall all care about this field enough to spend money, to rent space, to travel here, to bring books, to develop supplies, and to bring staff. What does that say about their commitment to this field? It says they're probably players that at least you need to look at, but there may be others. Your colleagues and your friends. Now, this is kind of a mixed bag because I've seen times when good advice comes from colleagues and friends who you know are publishing in certain areas and they can give you some advice about presses. But sometimes a colleague throws a temper tantrum and has a fit about a press over something really stupid, and they won't tell you that, but they'll have a very bad view of a press. I think what you need to do is kind of go out there and sample many colleagues to get a sense if there's a pattern there. Whether they think that some presses are really hot and moving well and respected in the field, or some of them are starting to fall away. That's a general feel, but it is information that at least you can have in front of you. And then what you can do is, most of you, I believe, are affiliated with a university. Go to the university press at your university or the scholarly publishing unit of the library of the university and ask them. Say, I've got a manuscript that looks like this. I am researching publishers that I think would be right for my type of project. Do you have any advice for me? More and more, the libraries are taking over being a great resource for faculty and students at the universities when it comes to this process of how to get published. And they've kind of stolen the thunder from university presses. And luckily for me, at Indiana University, we are one. The library and the press are joined together into the Office of Scholarly Publishing. And it's a unique situation, and I think everyone's benefited from it. Number 2, technology. Okay, you've got something that's kind of funky, and you think it's really going to add to the experience and understanding of the reader if you could have multimedia components or something else. How do you know which presses can do it? Well, first of all, again, you go to their websites and you look. Are they simply doing books? When you look at their digital books, are they simply doing PDFs, which is just a shadow of the print book? That gives you some sense of where they're going. But again, it has to be the most recent books. Look at their presence in online publishing venues and social media. Do they have an active social media presence? At Indiana University Press, I've required that every person have a Twitter account, and you have to tweet at least once a day. And believe me, there's some really wacky things that we tweet about with each other. It's a lot of fun to kind of eavesdrop. You can also look and see which grants have they chased after in order to upgrade themselves technologically. Ask your colleagues and friends, and again, you can talk to your representatives on campus about the technology, the technological aspects of various presses. Okay, here's the one that's often cloaked in darkness and it's hard to learn about, but I can give you some tips for being able to penetrate that darkness, light a candle. I'll keep the metaphor going for a while longer. How to learn about a press's faculty board. All right, if possible, you need to find out who on their faculty board represents your scholarly area. That isn't always have to be a problem or a case, but often the press website will have a listing of the faculty board members. Not always. And the editor will sometimes share, and sometimes not, who the faculty board members are. I have no problem doing that, and all you have to do is ask the editor. If they say they're not allowed to, well, it may not be their fault. It may be that faculty board has asked them not to share the information. But there are 2 questions that you can ask an acquisition editor, and you damn well should. And one is, what percentage of projects are turned down by their faculty board? What percentage are turned down? So in other words, you think about, I told you there were 3 levels of vetting before we got to the faculty board. Even with those 3 levels, how much of it is still turned down? And secondly, and this is critical as well, do the projects require a unanimous vote to be approved? Or could it be a simple majority vote? If it's a unanimous vote, oh Lord, does politics play a role? And there are some legendary stories that I can't share with you. But I will say this, because I'm that kind of devil. When I was the editor of American Indian Studies at Nebraska, Oklahoma, their faculty board, and they were our arch rival, their faculty board required it to be a unanimous vote. And I knew there was one faculty board member that hated certain types of projects, and I would just wait patiently. The project would be turned down, and then they would come to my welcoming arms. I gathered up almost a dozen books that way. And Oklahoma, it's a great press. I love the editors there. In fact, one of their leading editors is someone that used to work with me. But I think that there's a flawed structure when it's unanimous, given some of the pettiness of the academy and some of the willingness of certain types of scholars to impose their view of a field upon everybody around them. I think we've got to be much more inclusive than that. That's just me. Then ask colleagues who have worked with that press if they know how their experience has been with the faculty board as well. Number 4, what should you look for in an acquisition editor? In a minute, I'll tell you what an editor is looking for in you. First of all, you need someone who is knowledgeable of your area. Now, they're not going to be an expert in everything. How the heck could we be? Because we have to be inclusive when we acquire. I acquire in paleontology. I've acquired American Indian Studies. I acquired anthropology. Even saying I acquire in anthropology, think how wide and broad that field is. But at least they should have a sense of your field and where it's going. Now, how do you learn about the editors? And you need to know their names. Don't ever send an email to an editor that doesn't have the right name on it. Every press's website will have your acquisitions editors listed with their area of specialization and usually an email. Learn their names. How many times myself and my colleagues have received letters and emails addressed to the wrong person or the wrong press. That's a real ding-a-ling move by people. Okay, it's really easy to learn this information, and it's also respectful as well. Okay, you want an editor who is honest and open with you. You don't want to feel good from the editor. You want sound advice. Your editor is not your friend. Your editor has to be someone who can guide you through to make sure that your research is as accessible and as interestingly done as possible, but also somebody who's a source of information about the process so that you can go back to that person again and again and again. You don't want a rubber stamp. If you get a rubber stamp, it's not going to be a good thing. Like, one of the worst things that can happen is for someone to mistake an editor's interest with the editor automatically liking the manuscript. Then when we get the manuscript, we realize it's not where it needs to be. You really need to step back and say, this person hasn't seen my entire work yet, but based on the little information I've given them in a conversation, it looks like it could be a good fit for the press, and leave it at that. You need an editor who is not going to just let an outside reader help a manuscript get better. That editor has to read your manuscript. The number of editors who don't read manuscripts is embarrassing. And I require my editors, now you can't read every line, but you need to be engaged with every chapter. And that's another dark secret of the publishing world that no one wants to talk about, is that editors feel stressed out and often they don't have a chance to read your whole manuscript. They won't read it like a reader, but they will read it like a publisher, which means that they will dive in and they will know the arguments and they will go through the chapters and get a real sense of how accessible it is. But there are editors that don't. I'll leave it at that. You want someone to be experienced and respected at their press. This is a tough one. Think about it. You need a person who is, you need an editor who is respected by their colleagues at the press, so that if there are problems that arise, they can be your strongest advocate possible. I've worked before with editors who have a personality challenge and are not very well liked by their colleagues, and somehow their projects always tend to fall behind schedule. Don't know why. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. You want someone who's experienced as well, somebody who knows the ropes. And the way that we do it at Indiana University Press is that we bring people up through the ranks and have them work with a more experienced editor at conferences and going through manuscripts until they are ready to work by themselves with their first author, so that when we turn them loose, they know the ropes really well. You want someone who responds to queries and submissions in a timely manner. I once had a situation where I took over being a director of a press, and I've named all of them, so you have to guess which one it was. And when I arrived there, I get an email from a person in Folklore who said that their manuscript had been sent in 2 years ago, and no one had responded, but they'd been told that it was being read. It don't take 2 damn years to read a manuscript. And I'll be talking about those timelines in a minute. On top of the fact that the manuscript, they took forever to read the manuscript, they didn't respond in a timely fashion. Well, we have a rule, we have the 48-hour rule when possible. Some weeks are a little bit more hectic than others, but it's important that we stay in touch and that you feel like you haven't lost contact with us and your manuscript isn't going into a black hole. That's very important. And the stories do get out about which editors tend to be more available, and you just need to keep your ear to the ground. All right, what are we looking for? Oh, we look for a lot. And here's another big secret that no one wants to tell you. We talk to each other. If we're dealing with an asshole author, everybody knows. So if you're feeling the need to be that way, really try to hide it or seek professional help before you come talk to us. We do talk to each other all the time, and if we've had a bad experience, we tend to let the other people know in a very quiet way that it's been a challenge. Okay, every acquisition editor that's down there in that exhibit hall has a quota. They will not tell you that, but they have a quota. They have, as I said, between 15 to 25 books usually that they have to bring in a contract a year. That's tough, but it isn't tough. If you've got a flourishing field, or if you're acquiring an editor that works in several fields, you're able to fill that up fairly quickly. But what they're looking for are books that match the long-term goals that they have set for themselves. They don't just wander into a conference and say, "Hey, I like the book. I'm gonna take it." No, if the press has done its job well at home, each of those editors has a strategic plan for the next 5 years that says, here's my vision of my field, here's what I think needs to be written, here are the types of books that I'm going to be looking for, and thus I'm going to go find them. Now, that plan isn't rigid. Sometimes a really wonderful new area emerges and we jump on it, but they have a plan. They're looking for certain things. They've already kind of filtered things before they walk into the hall. Not all editors do that, but I think the better ones who are aggressively building their list do. We're also looking for books that, as much as possible, can help us earn back the money we're investing in them. It is very true that we're a nonprofit, but we don't want to throw away all of our money. So if we think we can get a reasonable return on investment, we're going to be considering that as a factor. But at the same time, I've had editors will come to me and say, this book is going to lose money, but it's an important book for whatever reason, for the field or for my list, but I've got this other book that is going to make a lot of money, it'll make up for it. And if you've got that kind of comprehensive, holistic vision of your list as an editor, you're going to have your way in-house by being able to bring in those books that don't make much money. The other thing we're looking for is we want an original work. We don't want the same old, same old. We want something that makes a clear contribution to scholarship. It's really exciting to see something new. Isn't it sad for me to say that? Don't you think the Academy should always be generating new? I can tell you from the viewpoint of people, a person who's seen thousands of manuscripts, that I see the same old all the time with just a mild turn. I could open some manuscripts and when they come to me and go, I bet I know how this is organized. Flip, flip, yep. I bet it's going to say this kind of, yep, flip, flip. As you're working on your book, be original. Be a unique voice. Be powerful in that way. Empower yourself by having your vision come through. Now, this is tough because the Academy forces it out of you because you have to go through the process where the committee tends to force you into being normal and being different and conventional. That's a crime. And so what you have to do is seize it back. Seize it back and be the brilliant voice, the visionary that you want to be. It's so exciting for all of us, even after all these years, to talk to a junior author who's got something new to say, something that will help us better understand something out there. That's why folklore is my favorite field. And I really mean this. That's why this is the only conference that I'm at this year. And the reason for that is because you see relevance in the everyday. You see relevance in people around you. And you use the tools of the Academy to help us better understand that. That's inspiring. That's taking the Academy and putting it to work in the real world. And as publishers, we love to help you with that. We're also looking as editors for books that are feasible. Don't give me a 2,000-page manuscript. I will push it back at you and run as fast as possible in the other direction. We want something that's appropriate length and level of complexity for its subject matter and technologically feasible as well. If you give me a book with a lot of color illustrations, number one, it better be a reason for it. It better make sense. And number two, understand that it's going to cost more money to make it, and thus that price is going to go up. And so we need to talk from the beginning about how we find the right marketplace for this beautiful book and yet not have it priced out of the reach of people who need it the most. And this is what we're looking for as well as author who we can work with as a partner in the publishing process. Folks, it's really tough. You've gone through the Academy and you get kind of pummeled a little bit and encouraged, and then you get to another whole level of people looking at your work for the first time. It can be discouraging because you have an editor look at it, then you have people in the peer review process looking at it, then you have this faculty board looking at it. It can be tough. All I can say is this is the nature of the game, and if you can't play it, don't do it, because you have to be able to accept criticism. That doesn't mean that the readers are always right. It doesn't mean the acquisition editor is always right. But if they're saying this now before a book is published, you might want to think about that very carefully, because you'd rather have those reviews done in private rather than in a public forum in a journal. Think about it. You need to be able to be willing to listen and get advice about all aspects of a manuscript, from the title to the cover and so on and so forth. The second point is probably the most important for those of us who work with our colleagues every day, and that is to treat the staff respectfully. I'm a director, and that means that a lot of people are really nice to me when they want me to acquire their book. And then they can turn into absolute raging horrible people with people that they think can't fight back. You know? So if I acquire somebody and then they start to treat my assistant in very rude ways, I get rid of the manuscript. I make it a point. So you are not just dealing with an acquisition editor, you're dealing with an organization as a whole of people who work together closely all the time. Most of us are friends. And if I bring in somebody who is monstrous, they will inflict their pain on everyone through this process, and sometimes it's for years to come. We talk about that, how easy authors are to work with when we bring a project to the board inside the press, because we have to take that part of it seriously, because every editor down there in the exhibit hall can tell you stories of authors gone wrong, and some of them are pretty grim. All right, you need to adhere to schedules. This isn't graduate school anymore, and I've got a couple authors at this meeting that when I see them, there's going to be death riding in on wings of vengeance because they've missed their deadline several times. This is not graduate school. You're signing a contract with a schedule that we'll put in motion plans for our publishing program for the next X number of years. We will start allocating books for whatever season that you've said you're going to get your final manuscript into us. So if you miss that deadline, you fall to the back of the queue. Follow your deadlines. If you're an editor of a volume, you have to keep everyone writing their individual chapters on track, and you have to be firm with them. And this is tough. First time editors of volumes tend to be pretty lax with and kind of afraid of those who are writing books with them. And I don't work with them much because those edited volumes tend to kind of get out of control really quickly. How do I contact a publisher and pitch my book? Well, you're at the right conference for it, aren't you? One step at a time is very important. first thing you do is you come up with a short list so that you don't waste their time and you're not wasting your time. And we've talked about how you research all the different factors and you put together a short list. 3 publishers, 5 publishers. If you've only got one, it may say something about your project or your subject area. It may not, but it may. And second, know specifically which editors to contact. So if you're coming to a meeting like this and you decided that you've got your short list, that short list should not only include the names of the presses, but the names of the editors as well. Now we're going to talk about the don'ts, and I could add on for about 2 hours about this, but we'll start with this. Don't drop by unannounced or try to schedule a chat at their office. So, for example, you happen to be driving through Bloomington, Indiana, and you decided you want to just drop by and talk to me about your book. That'd be a mean thing to do, because I've got a lot of things that are going on. I've got meetings that have been scheduled sometimes months ahead of time. Don't do it. We're very busy handling hundreds of manuscripts at the same time. As I said, we're planning ahead 3 to 5 years each editor, and we're turning down a lot of it too. I would say 8 out of 10 we turn down, but we still have to look at those initial submissions. Now think about this. If you just drop in just unannounced, why would I even want to take time to get to know you? I once had a situation where I came to my office, this is when I was at Nebraska, and somebody was sleeping outside the building with a manuscript in their tote bag. Yep. And I felt really bad for them because they had heard that I liked books on American Indians, so they decided to show this one to me. And so I brought them upstairs, and we always had a rule in Nebraska that we had a giant table in front for those that we weren't really sure about. So that table was surrounded by designers who were huge burly men who could escort people from the building. He used to do that. Well, this guy sits down, and he obviously hasn't eaten in a while, and he hasn't washed in a while. I can verify the latter particularly. As he's starting to talk to me, because we try to give everybody a little bit of time, I notice that his tote bag is starting to move on its own on the table behind him. And then a ferret jumps out and starts to run around. And as he's talking, he just keeps talking. He reaches out just kind of nonchalantly, grabs the ferret by the head and shoves it back in the tote bag and draws the string again. And for the rest of that talk, it was rocking back and forth. This is what we sometimes deal with, and that's why it's really not good to drop by unannounced, and we get a little nervous when you do. Yes, that story happened. There are worse. The next thing you don't want to do is send an email or a letter. Don't send anything by regular mail. Do an email to a generic editor. Do your research. Don't just say, "Dear editor." Looks like, geez, you couldn't even look it up on the website. Do not send the entire manuscript. Do not bring it to a conference. Do not send it unattached unless we ask for it, because we're not going to read it, and you're wasting your time. We are already reading a bunch of stuff that we like and know about. Do not telephone out of the blue. Do not bring your entire manuscript to a conference and dump in the editor's lap. My last conference I went to, someone did that. The minute the author left the booth, the editor took it and dropped it in the trash can because they didn't want to carry it back on the plane. And do not follow me into a restroom and pitch my manuscript to me as a captive audience. This has happened several times. This is what you do. Each of the press's website has guidelines for submitting a project, and it's usually step-by-step spells it out. Just go to the website. Usually you click on author, and it will say what they're looking for. And usually they'll want you to email a letter of inquiry or a proposal, never the whole manuscript. They want a condensed version. And they'll spell out usually what they're looking for in terms of information. So you need to address it to the correct editor and the press. I recently got one to Gary Dunham, Director, Illinois, University of Illinois Press. That felt good. Yeah. And then I'm looking at confused thinking, do they want me or do they want Illinois? So I read it anyway. So then again, so we're going back to the same themes. When you're sending a proposal, you say what it is, why it matters, what its audience is, what are the specifications of it. In other words, how long is it, how many illustrations you think it has. And here's a really important thing that you want to include. Why is that press right for you? We love to hear that because that shows you've done your research about it. Us. It may be that there's a series that is perfect for your book. It may be that a certain type of book that we've done is a lot like the one that you want to do, and thus you think we would be interested in your subject as well. What's the status of your writing? You have to be truthful. There's nothing worse than somebody saying, I've got my manuscript ready, and I get excited and say, sure, I'd like to see it, and then they tell me, oh, it's still 6 months away. I forget about you really quickly, and then you have to reintroduce yourself all over again. So it's better to be truthful about the status of your writing. How close are you to sending us a complete manuscript if we ask for it? And yeah, what is your timeline? How close are you? If a noted scholar who publishes with the press has recommended you to the press, I would say that. That helps as well. It gets their attention. You're allowed, when you are initially reaching out, to talk to several presses at the same time. Why? Because we're not spending a lot of time looking at what you have submitted. But let us know that you're contacting several presses at the same time. We don't mind looking through a submission of 3 pages at all, even if we know other presses are looking at it. But if it's a full manuscript, we damn well do mind. Include the correct contact information. You know, a number of times I've gotten stuff, and the only reason why I know how to contact a person is because I have an email address, but I don't know who the person is. It can happen. I'm just telling you, really be aware of everything. Be as concise as possible. Excuse me. Also, if you've got a noted scholar who publishes with the press, sometimes on your behalf, they will speak to the editor of the press. I've often got a call or an email from an old friend of mine who has published with me many times saying, hey, Garrett, I just learned about this new project. You really might be interested, you know, and you might want to look at it because I've read it and I think it's really awesome. That can happen. If you've got someone on the doctoral committee who can help you in that way, have them email or make a call on your behalf. They owe that to you. Or a colleague in your department, or someone else who knows your work. We don't mind hearing from noted scholars about someone young and promising. It's exciting. Also, when you're if you're going to a conference and you want to approach an editor, a press for the first time, you've got your short list, you know the names, you got them there, make an appointment ahead of time. And don't wait till the last few days, because I can tell you that my 2 editors who are downstairs in that hall, their schedules were filled 2 months ago. They've got a little bit of time, and one of the reasons I'm here, aside from giving this publishing workshop, is to act as a backup, because they're going to be away from their exhibit so much that they're not going to have time to talk to people who just drop by. That's what can happen with the popular press. When you say you're going to be meeting with someone, be on time. But also understand that sometimes other people drop by and there may be a little bit of a wait, so don't be unhappy. Don't sigh heavily. Yes, I've had that happen before. We'll try to get you when we can. But do make an appointment and make it for 15 minutes. Don't go longer than that the first time through. Just a little bit of time. This is hard. The next part is really hard because especially when you haven't done it before and you get in a weird situation where you're kind of looking at yourself talking and going, what words are coming out of my mouth? We've all been through that. So you're going up, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, you're meeting with me, you introduce yourself. You need to be as concise as you would if you were emailing me. Don't be diarrhea of the mouth person. We will soon hate you, and we will wish that you would go away. Because the more that you talk to me and you ramble, the more I think that you write like that, and the more that my eyes glaze over. Please be compassionate and spare us the mental agony. So you see the themes again. State what it is. This is what I'm working on. Okay? Say why it matters. This is why people will want to read what I'm sharing with the world. This is why you need to invest $20,000 of your money to make my book happen. Tell me about its audience. And again, I mentioned to you before, don't say everyone's going to like it, scholars and teachers and so on. No, if it is simply scholars who work in this area are going to like it, be realistic, because if you're not realistic, we will be right back at you. But we asked that question in order to see whether you've thought about it. Specifications, tell me how it's going. What kind of manuscript is it? Tell me why you want to publish with me. Well, and what's the status of your work and what's your timeline for completion? I ask a question of nearly every first-time author, and it always throws them off, and I do that in order to throw them off. Because they start to go into this, and they should. But often what I will say is, I'll look at them and say, why do you love it? And they'll look at me surprised, because they've been in the trenches so long, they don't step back and think about the passion that is there that carries them forward to the finish line. That matters a lot to us. We like to see those kind of fires of passion ignited about your work, because it gets us feeling that way as well. If you have made an appointment to speak to an editor, let them know that you're talking to other people as well. Now, it's good to have a print version of your proposal with you, but don't just hand it out. You have to be invited to hand it to them. And again, for the love of God, do not bring the whole manuscript. Why would you want to on a plane anyway? Okay, let's keep going. What happens next? Okay, you've spoken to us. Or you have read the directions on our website, and you've sent in all the material that we've asked for. Okay, so either way, we have got that kind of shorter version of what your project's about. Give us about a month to a month and a half to look at everything and respond. Sometimes it can happen on the spot. It may just be a lucky day where an editor's got 2 hours and they get an email and they open it up and go, Jesus, I want this thing. I'm gonna jump on it. Or it may be that you're at a conference and everything clicks. Then there's going to be some exciting stuff happening. Acquisitions editors are very busy. They are good human beings and they care about, they also have projects at various stages they have to finish up. Right now, the 2 editors from IU Press who are down there in the exhibit hall are currently putting through, between the 2 of them, they're putting through 30 books into copy editing over the next 3 weeks. And then we've got people at home that are helping them. So you can imagine they get distracted. Now, after the content and the pitch, a number of things could happen. We could invite a proposal itself if we haven't already seen it. Okay? We could invite the full manuscript. That's a really exciting thing. When I say, you know, I really like what you're doing. I'd like to see what you have as a whole. Now, if they do that, and you accept, you can only go with that press. That is a cardinal rule, and you're going to hear otherwise from some senior members in the academy. Don't screw your lives. Don't do that. We talk to each other. There's one time I was working with an author on a project in Western history, and he sent an email out, and this was in the early years of email, and not everybody knew how to do it right. And he accidentally sent it to 7 presses that he was currently working with, all with the same manuscript. So we did a conference call, and we turned him down completely. Yep. Everybody had spent a lot of money on the same readers, not on the same readers, but on readers. We spent a lot of time looking at the manuscript. This guy was playing us against each other. It's just not cool. Okay, so it could be that we're looking for something a little more focused, maybe a revised proposal. We might want the full manuscript. It could be that we're asking for a revision or a rethinking. And if you don't agree with that, you can walk away. That's cool. But we want to make sure we're on the same page. Or we might say, you know, we don't want it. Now, normally, if we don't want the thing at a conference, we'll say that to you because we don't want to waste your time or someone else's time. But it might be that there's something that's kind of interesting about the work and we want to take it back home and think about it a bit. But most of the time, the rejections occur pretty quickly. 2 big tips. If I invite you to send me a full manuscript, respond as soon as possible. That can be tough if you've done a multiple submission thing. But what you need to do at least is to tell me, I will let you know by this date. Okay, be upfront about it. Don't sit on it. I once had a case where I invited a manuscript. I didn't hear from that person for 2 months. Then I realized, of course, what they were doing was that they were going with another press. Well, they could have just told me. And then they came back to me crawling and wanted me to look at it. And I'm like, no, you weren't up front with me now. I don't think I want to work with you as a partner in the process because you obviously were starting to play us against each other. So I sent them on their merry way. If it's turned down, accept it in a professional way. It can be hard because you will take it personally because this is a part of you. But understand that this is the nature of the game, and it's best to get it over with quickly. If we don't feel like there's a good fit, it may not be about your manuscript. It could be a great work. It's just not right for us. So we won't change your minds. Okay, I once turned down a manuscript, and an author got outraged and called me. We counted this because we just watched the voicemails add up 37 times in half an hour to complain. Why? It's not going to help change anyone's mind. So thank the editor for the time. You never know, especially in folklore, the field's pretty focused. We're bound to work at some point on a book together. Okay, what happens after the invitation to submit a proposal or full manuscript? Let me check on our time. We're doing great. All right, so I've asked you to send something in. You accept, right? Say it, you've accepted. First thing that we do is that we look at it internally in the press. So let's say I've invited a full manuscript, and you're excited, you send it off. Here's the hard thing for you. For 4 to 6 weeks, don't think about it. You can't. And I know you're going to be thinking, well, do they like it? 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 Especially if you see them at a conference and they're not saying anything to you. They probably just haven't had a chance to sit down fully with it. What we normally do at Indiana is that on Fridays, most of the editors stay home to do a deep dive into full manuscripts so that they can give them the time and the respect they deserve. We don't want to quickly make a decision about a full manuscript. So it's a number of things. And what we're looking for, of course, is the fit with the list. The feasibility is a publication. Can we make this financially possible? Financially possible. Is it possible to make it as a book? And is it ready to be set outside? Now, I've been many times when I've got a manuscript from a first-time author, it's good, but it's a diamond in the rough. And if I send it out through the peer review process, it would get hammered far too much. And why would we do that to you? So that would be the case where we would say, here's what we think you need to do in order to send it out, in order for us to send it out to the outside world. And if you don't agree, you can walk away. If you agree, make the revisions and get back to us, and then we'll send it out. The review process. External peer review is a cornerstone of the tenure system. You have to have peer-reviewed books in order to get tenure. So this process we take very seriously. It's usually between 3 months and 6 months. Sometimes it can be 1 month. Sometimes it can be 7 months. It's usually 2 scholars at the same time. They don't have to review who they are to you, but they will know who you are. And boy, can that lead to a lot of messiness. And that's why you want editors who are going to be shepherding your book through this process to understand the political dynamics of the field as much as everything else. And a number of times when I've had an author be attacked only because the person reading it, their student was attacked by somebody else who knew the author, it's ridiculous. Just little boys and girls. So what we try to do as much as possible is to get a sense of the lineages of the academy, get a sense of who likes whom, who's right for the manuscript. But the whole point of the peer review process is to make this work the best it can be, hammer it into shape before it comes out and can never be altered when it's cast in stone. So we send a standard review form to the authors. They don't have to follow it. They can just type up their own evaluation. We ask them to either recommend publishing or publishing after revisions, or it needs major revisions, or to reject it. This isn't a thumbs up or thumbs down. This is advisement to the press. There are editors who just automatically listen to the outside readers, but I prefer editors who would take that as advisement about how we would then move forward or not move forward with the manuscript, and ultimately we make the call. Okay, so I've already gone through that recommendation. Okay, so what do? We get back the reviews. What do we do? Well, if they're positive, they're both positive, we will move forward to the faculty board, and we'll ask for a letter of response from you to address all calls for final revision. And the faculty board will see your response. They'll see the reviews. They'll see a description of the project. Or if we feel like the reviews are split, we've got one really positive, one kind of come see, come saw, we'll go for a third reader. Or it might be that there's promise, both readers have said this is a diamond in the rough still, but we think it needs some rethinking. And if we agree with that, we'll talk to you about it and say, we all agree, the readers and the press, that this manuscript needs some rethinking and revision, and it's up to you. If you feel like that no one's getting where you're coming from, walk away. Don't have a tug of war or fight. If you agree with them, then go ahead and make the revisions. If you feel like there are some things you agree with and some things you don't, make an argument for it in your response. Or we reject it. This rarely happens because by the time it's sent out for review, we've already looked at it very carefully and rigorously in-house. But it can happen. And I've had times when I've got an angry response from a reader. Obviously, there's a personal thing involved. We'll throw it out, and we'll go to another reader. Had that happen just recently where we had some freak out from some person who said, this is terrible, you know, it's an abomination, that word was used. I'm like, really? Like, okay, well, there's obviously an issue there that we don't want to know about. Wow, they've offered me a contract to publish. Look at those 2 exclamation points. We all want that in our lives. Okay. You're going to hate this part because you don't want to think about it. And this is going to screw you for the next 20 years because this is about holding on to and understanding what you're giving away in terms of the intellectual property rights over something that you've created. Hardly any author reads their contract. And then they get upset when we're acting according to what we've all agreed upon. The contract is a common ground between the press and the author when it comes to stating what the financial responsibilities are, what the different responsibilities are when it comes to managing rights and so on. So read it. Do you need to send it to a lawyer? This is a standard contract that we have. If people want to, they can. Usually the lawyers come back and say, yeah, it's a standard contract, whatever. But that's entirely up to you. Okay, what's in a standard publishing contract? The contracts vary by press. At SUNY Press, it was 16 pages long, small type, because that's the New York State government, and they're horrendous when it comes to legalese. At Nebraska, it was 4 pages. At Indiana, it's 6. But they all basically say the same thing. You assign the right to publish and manage the content of your book to the press. Someone's got to manage it. The press needs the legal right to actually publish it and manage the rights for you. What we're looking for is it to be worldwide in all languages, all editions and formats. We want to cast it as broadly as possible because that helps us to make your book visible everywhere on this planet, particularly with the book being digital and online. It assigns a copyright, which is registered with the Library of Congress. Our policy at Indiana for monographs by single authors is that the author gets the copyright. It spells out a due date for submitting the final manuscript. If you don't make it, we could cancel the contract. Better make sure that that due date is one that you can meet. And it specifies the length and number of illustrations. It spells out advances and royalties. Now, there are 2 types of royalties. One is list. You will never see that in a scholarly book. And one is net. List is the amount of money you get as a % of the selling price. So if your book costs $20 and you have a 10% list royalty, you get $2. Versus net, that's the % after discounts and other costs have been subtracted from the selling price. So it would be more like 50 cents. But you're not going to make a lot of money on a monograph. And the amount of money that the press can make from having net rather than list royalties means that we can invest that little bit of money we get back into other nonprofit scholarly books. It spells out the subsidiary rights managed and licensed by the press. This means translations. Book clubs. Every now and then we still get book clubs. Audiobooks, reprints, and other publications. We've got a sub-rights person on the staff who generates hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue every year, which goes into the coffers, which helps us to maintain our scholarly publishing mission. Particularly for those of you who are interested in seeing your book translated, Just keep that in mind, that sub-rights are really important. And it's important to give those rights to the press so that they can track down and find arrangements with publishers in other countries for you. It also spells out who gets to approve the cover and title. Normally, the best practices of the industry is that the author would get feedback into both, but the press ultimately decides. If you don't like that, talk to the press from the beginning. If you still don't like it, walk away and find a press that will let you have final say. I won't, but I'll definitely listen to you because I've already established a good rapport with you, and I've been working with you for a long time, so we trust each other, but ultimately I'm the publisher and I have to stand by, invest money in the book, and thus the cover will be the final say of the press. But we do let you see it and talk to us about it. And it's really important, as you were thinking about the cover, when you're talking to your editor, is share ideas that you have with them so that from the beginning you can have as much input as possible. One of the things that we do in our initial conversations at the time when we have a publishing agreement is that we start talking about a cover and a title as well. Let's talk about the title for a moment. People have titles. They tend to have titles that tend to look like the titles of the journal articles. You've got a semicolon and it goes on far too long. Far too long. Goes on. Most of your keywords need to be in the title, and it needs to be as short as possible in terms of Amazon searches. We're really good at taking something that goes on and on forever and shortening it up as much as possible. Titles should convey and evoke the heart of the book. It doesn't reflect every damn thing in it. So don't go on and on and on because we're going to trim it. In terms of cover images, you need to be thinking about the fact that securing the rights to a cover image can be really expensive, and you're responsible for paying for it if you want it, and we like it. What else is in the standard publishing contract? There's a clause in there that guarantees that you guarantee that every part of your work is original and that you have the right to publish it. This is because of plagiarism. But you have to, so in other words, if somebody sues the press because of the book has been ripped off from elsewhere, you're responsible, and they're going to sue you and not us. We just recently at IU had a case of plagiarism. It come up again after all these years. It's amazing. It still comes up, and it is the worst thing possible. I once had a case at Nebraska. I had two cases that were terrible. One was a person sent me a draft of their first book. I sent it out to a reader. The reader came back, Xerox pages from his dissertation, compared it line by line with over 100 pages from this manuscript, and they were directly ripped off. That book has been published by another press. I'll just leave it at that. Of course, we immediately turned it down. I had another case where we were doing a paper edition of a classic book in American Indian Studies, and we asked the scholar to write an introduction. That introduction, 5 paragraphs were taken out of another article on the same subject. I had 5,000 copies of that book in my warehouse, and the day I learned about it, I destroyed every single copy because it is a terrible thing. We have to stand for it right. There's a line we don't cross, and that's plagiarism. That's why it's in all of our contracts. So in your contract, it's going to say, and you can't fight this because the press, according to the legal counsel of its university, has to stand up for the university's rights. If you're guaranteeing it's original, if there's a lawsuit about it, they're coming after you and not the university. The one you really want to look for is the reversion of rights clause. When can you get back all your rights to your book and go elsewhere if you want to? That's really important. Most of the time is when it's declared out of print. Books aren't declared out of print much anymore, even though it says it in a contract. Think about it. We can still make a profit on a book even when it's selling 25 copies a year. So you need to think about carefully how you want the reversion of rights clause to be stated, or if you even really care. You might 10 years from now. The final steps. See, we're almost done. Look at us. Here we go. It's still not easy. Now, okay, you've got your contract. You're so excited. You've got a deadline. In 6 months, you're to send your illustrations, your manuscript to the editor at the press, right? It's a lot of work because, number one, you have to revise according to what you agreed. The editor will read it, if they're a good editor, and go, you didn't do this, did you? Try to sneak it in the side door, didn't you? But no, we're going to hold you accountable. So you need to be able to make that deadline because you're in violation of your contract if you don't. You need to revise according to what you've agreed to in your author's response. It must be complete. The number of people who send in everything except the acknowledgments, or they send in everything except the illustrations, it sits on our desk. We have to have the whole manuscript before we can proceed forward. And this is where things are going to take a long time. If you have illustrations that are integral to your work and you and the editor and the reviewers have agreed, you have to get high-res copies of them according to the specifications, the format specifications of the press, and have them ready to send in. You have to have the permission to get them. The number of times manuscripts have been held up because the author decided to rewrite it first and then forget about the illustrations until the last moment is staggering. So you need to be thinking about the permissions issue all along. Okay, so let's assume you've got the permission, you've got your illustrations, you've got your manuscript, and it's a beautiful thing. And you send it off and you're like, thank God it's over. This time I can say it's almost over. Not quite, but it's close. And yes, you can go out and drink to your heart's content after that. Well, you probably, given it's a manuscript, you've probably been drinking before then too. Okay, so it comes in. This is going to be a kind of a scary thing for you because this is kind of when you have to move on beyond your acquisition editor. At the press, we're going to get everything together. The editor downstairs will see your submission. They'll hand it to an assistant who will get it ready for copy editing. And then we actually physically pick up some paperwork and we move it over to the production department where you'll be assigned a project manager who will become your new best friend. And they will introduce themselves and say, here is our schedule until the book is going to be published at this date. Before then, these things are going to be happening. And the first thing that happens is copy editing. Now, we're talking copy editing on a light level. We're talking about making sure that the words are spelled correctly, that the punctuation is good, and so on and so forth. When it goes out for copy editing, it will then be turned around and sent back to you for you to approve every bit of copy editing. I once had an author so upset with the copy editor that he wrote the word no so forcefully that it ripped the paper. That was awesome. Yeah, we were dealing with a cycle. After it goes into copy editing and it's come back and you've approved it and not approved all the copy edits, then it gets really exciting because then the book is designed and laid out and the cover is designed. That's really exciting because the next time you see anything, it's going to look like a book, and you'll get to approve the page proofs. But do not make corrections in the page proofs because it will slow everything down. I've had people try to rewrite chapters at the time of page proofs, and you're responsible for paying for every letter that is changed because we've spent a lot of money in getting that book to that point, and this is our way of reminding you to back off. Let us get the work done. The marketing team, by this point, would have asked you to fill out a questionnaire, giving us key information about where online and what scholars who would be interested in your book would gather in terms of forums and so on, and blogs and so on, as well as conferences. If we're a press that publishes in your area, we probably already know it, but it's good to get that advice. We will drop an advertising plan, an exhibits plan, an events plan. You know, it could be that if you're a professor at a university, there may be interviews with your local paper that will be set up. There could be book signings. We're having a massive book signing at the Indiana booth tomorrow for all of our authors. We rarely do it for individual authors because every now and then you have a situation where no one shows up and the author cries in a booth, and I've had that happen too many times, so we tend to do a collective signing for everybody. It's also really important to think about how you yourself, with the network that you have, can make your book as visible as possible. The press will often invite you to write a blog post about it that they'll put on the press's blog post. there could be advertising and PR to be done with your university. You may be part of a community of scholars that we're not aware of, and you're a very active voice there. And you can get them to be interested in the book as well. You'll be working with the marketing people as a partner in this process. And it really hits home for the first 6 months after your book is published. And this is kind of a sad thing, because what can happen is, say, for example, all the folklore books that we have coming out this year, the height of the marketing always takes place in the first 6 months after a book is published. Then it starts to dip a little bit, right? It dips down, it gets kind of quiet, authors get kind of sad, thinking no one loves them. And then what happens is that we start seeing the reviews of scholarly books start appearing in journals within about a year or so. Then usually interest starts to surge back up again, and we'll have kind of a steady state for a while. So expect most of the work to be done in terms of marketing, most of the activity to be in those first 6 months. So that's the optimum time to strike. We try to time the release of publications in folklore to be mostly in the fall. Why? Because of this conference and because that's the most active time from what we can tell. We do the same thing with anthropology as well when it comes to scholars getting together and talking and so on, though we do some in spring, but we tend to do most of our books in the fall. I think we're almost done. Yay, you. That is it. That's all I have for you for now. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm speaking on a general level to represent all of the publishing houses down there in the exhibit hall and elsewhere. I can give you some specific examples of how we do things at IU Press as well. But if you have questions, let me know. Yes.
You talked about having acquisition editors here. And
Yep. Yep.
So we should have those things published before the middle of policy. If we haven't seen anything, is it fair to say that yes, this is part of a larger scholarly work, but it's part of all the presentations, it's not necessarily in manuscript form yet? The research is being done, it's still in process, but it's not necessarily a product.
Do you have a table of contents yet for the work? Do you have a table of contents for your work?
I mean, I can have one.
That's what you need. You have to coalesce it that way. You don't want to talk to them too early, because what will often happen is researchers will find that as it evolves, as your work matures, as you're writing it, as you bring in those pieces into a whole vehicle of content, you'll find that things change. And so what you're representing early on that a press is interested in may not be what they're going to be interested in when you have it in final form. So it's a judgment call by you when you're putting together all the pieces, when you feel like you've got enough branding of your content and messaging that you can talk about it in a coherent way that will last as you're writing it. Okay, if that makes sense. Okay.
And then, the general,
Yeah.
can you say a year before the manuscript? Is that too far? Is that?
I'm always hesitant to give a date, because some people work faster than other people. I always say, and that's why I have those bulleted points about when you can talk about your work as a whole, when you have a table of contents, when you have a real sense of when you're going to have it finished. And sometimes it's a year out. I would say most commonly it's about a year to year and a half out. Other times there'll be people who don't want to talk to anyone until they get the whole thing done. That's kind of scary to me, because I really want to know that there was at least some interest on the other end of the equation. But it happens sometimes. Other questions? Yep.
In spite of all of this, which is wonderfully presented, makes it very clear to me to step.
Yep.
What about independent scholars?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It is emerging scholars who have a great idea.
Yep.
Have you had cases where you've done this kind of thing?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really gets me vexed about the Academy, one of about 100 things. That is the fact that they tend to, I think that the process shuts down and shuts out a lot of independent scholars. For one thing, it's expensive to often come to these conferences, for example. We don't care whether you're working at a university. We care about we care about the book itself. And what kind of vision do you have? What kind of research, what kind of story are you telling? It doesn't matter to us. It may matter to some acquisition editors who are looking for established senior scholars, because it's just the way they do things at that publishing house. But I can tell you that the philosophy of the people that I've always worked with is we're looking for a wonderful idea. We don't care where you're at in your life or what you have chosen to follow as a path. That doesn't matter.
And they see through some of it, it's like one professor basically wanted more of his writing inserted in.
That always
our
happens.
publication,
Yep.
and we swallowed it and.
Yep, yep,
That's the only way we get through
yep,
it. That's
yep.
a bad thing.
I know. It's a wonder there's any originality left in the academy with that kind of idiotic response goes on. What I will say to you is this, is that what what you have just said to me, you say to an editor. If they look at you and run away because they're afraid to talk about the unspeakable, you don't want to work with them. Because I think you need to be honest about it and say, here's an original work that we are really proud of, but when we try to get it published, it becomes formalized. It moves away from where we want it to go. Now, it could be that there's a middle line that can be walked, where there's some inflection from the academy that is going to make a difference and improve the work, because you might have an audience that will include the academy. That might happen. But I will say this, is that I've seen so many times how things have been shut down. And one of the arguments I've had with faculty boards in the past is when they start talking about where an author is currently working. And they often do it in a very arrogant way. And I'm like, and I'm thinking inside, F you, but I'm also thinking on the outside, this is really sad because of the state of the economy. And also the fact that some people want to walk their own path in life. They don't want to be a part of your world, but yet they have something important. They have important research that needs to be shared or a story that needs to be heard. Why don't, and so I pushed that along, and I made it clear we do not think about we don't take into consideration the backgrounds of authors at all, at least in my press. I don't know how it is elsewhere. Now, that's the way it's got to be. I mean, if we're going to make change, we have to do it from the very start. Anybody else? Yep.
That's a follow-up question, actually. So we shouldn't even bother to send CVs. We don't care about.
I don't care. I don't mean that. The fact is that I need to see something that has been thought out, fully formed. But in terms of CV, we like to have a sense of what you've done in the past. So a CV by itself, I could care less about. A CV to show me the road you're on is good. I like to see that. And I also like to show that I have authors on my list who aren't established scholars. That's fine. So I think it's important, but I don't think it's the only thing. Anybody else? It's your time to talk to a publisher. Come on, you got questions, I know it. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. I see them as commercial presses. But remember, I'm really looking at it from the perspective of someone who's in folklore. I mean, if you're going to publish poetry, obviously there's another whole type of press as well that would be bringing in. But if I'm looking at it from some people who are going through and have work in folklore, to me, those are your three main choices. Now, there's arguments made that Cambridge University Press is a commercial press. It's not a university press. I would agree with that completely. But they're allowed to hold the name University Press. They're gigantic. I mean, I would say Oxford University Press is a commercial press as well. Even though there were elements of it, there was still like a university press. If you recall, I did state that university presses are very varied and they don't want to talk about it, but there's a lot of elitism in a certain sector of the university press world. It's largely centered on the East Coast. It's the way it is. Sucks, but it is. Well, I am from Maine. I'm from Maine, so I'm an East Coast person, so I know them well. Other questions? Yep.
Sorry if this was covered
Huh?
earlier. What's the earliest in the process, the writing process,
Yep.
that you would recommend authoring participate?
Well, at the very beginning, I talked about the fact that when you have a sense of your whole manuscript, when you've owned it, when you have a sense of what it is, why it's important, how long it's going to be, when you have a table of contents as well. And you have a sense of the schedule of when you're going to finish your work. That's the time to go talk to a press after you've created a short list. You don't want to go to a press and say, I've got an idea. No one cares. We hear that all the time. You want to say, here's what I've been working on. Here's why I think it matters. Here's the audience. Here's when I will have a full manuscript. This is why I think it fits with your list. Are you interested? And they'll stare at you, and who knows? It's just a big game. Oh, the other thing I should have said to you, when you make appointments to see people at conferences, don't make them at the end of the day. We're burnt out. Don't make it don't make it during the third day either. Try to make it during the first day or the second day, because by the third day, particularly for a large conference, not this one, everyone sounds the same. Yep.
Is it too late to make an appointment?
It wouldn't be me you'd be speaking with. It would be my editors. I'm the director, and I just come in and do a few things as backups. But I know that they're pretty booked, but I also know that there is a window this afternoon for one of the editors at least. But there's other presses down there as well. And again, I don't want to get into that trap of just talking about my press. I really want to represent every press, because there are a lot of great editors in that room. They've worked very hard for years, and there's lots of choices for all of you. And I will say this, I've been doing this workshop for 19 years, and I've never acquired a book from this workshop, ever. What the hell am I doing wrong? The reason why that is because, I'm just trying to talk about the process in overall. I think it's important to talk about it in general, so that you are fully informed when you make that first contact about your work and about the possibilities for you. Don't let them become your source of information. Own it yourself first. Anything else? Yep. Yep. I just think this is based upon my own experience, but also the experience of people who are also acquisition editors, and we'll go out and have a beer during a conference like this. And time again, I always hear this about people coming into their booth, not ready to really talk to them. It's nice to meet a nice person, but ultimately when it comes to the business that we're in, it's a waste of your time and everyone else's time. If that makes sense. I didn't mean to discourage anyone. But
It's encouraging.
Okay, so it's like the wind beneath your wings.
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel better. Anything else? Yep.
No question.
Yes.
Is there a possibility of publishing translated stories
Mhm.
from this case, the Chinese culture? So these are collected stories from China,
Mhm.
translated.
Yep. Well, the first step is that you would have to see which publishers in the United States actually are interested in that type of book. So you would look and see who's currently publishing that type of translation. And that helps to narrow down to a short list the presses that you should approach. Okay?
Any recommendations?
I'm not going to do that here. That's not my role here. My role is to encourage you to research that. Because I'm always afraid if I give recommendations, first of all, I know far too much about the darkness at the heart of everything. And some of that might spill out here, but also I don't want to prejudice you one way or the other. You've got to decide that on your own. That's very important. But God knows I have stories. Yep.
Yeah, just to supplement what you said, the American Translators Association does
Mm-hmm.
have a great supplement where they address that.
Yep.
Publishers are specifically what they're trying to.
Yep. Yep. And there are a lot of fine publishers interested in the Asian market.
Yes.
Yep. 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 We don't care about that, but the other side of it is you don't want to have that much out there yet, because we want to. I would say that if you've got 10 chapters in your book, You don't want more than 3 of them at the most to be previously published. Probably 2 is better. And the reason, of course, is because we want it to be original so we can sell it. But on the other hand, it's good for you in terms of career steps to have those kind of articles out there. I had a person last year who came to me with a book and said it was original, and I was excited because it looked pretty good. And because it's in folklore, and we've got 2 PhDs in folklore in our editorial staff, they said to me right away, wait, we've seen this before. And out of 6 chapters, 4 of them have been previously published. What the hell? Really? Really? What are you trying to do? So in other words, you want me to invest tens of thousands of dollars of time and money in order to put out what's already been put out there. It's insulting. It's a waste of time. So it's a balancing act. Other questions that you just thought of? Yes.
You know, some universities are requiring students
Mm-hmm. Yep.
so what happens in that case? Should, if the students want to publish that fiction, should they be published or not?
That was a real challenge about 10 years ago when it became the common practice. And I know that university presses freaked out about it at first, but in most cases, we encourage, I would say at least all the cases I've dealt with and that my colleagues that I know about, we say that whatever your university says you have to do, you can do it. And we also think that there's a huge difference between that manuscript and what a finished book would be. And so we're not worried about it. I can't imagine any publisher at this point that is worried about it. And if they are, they're not really telling you the truth. They're just trying to scare you. Yep. Because I've seen a number of these raw manuscripts. I wrote a dissertation, and I have to say this, 972 pages long. No one will ever read it. If I tried to turn it into a book, it'd be so different. And it'd be a completely different thing. So it's your first sense of the wholeness of your research. And that's not going to be the final voice, the final findings. Other questions? The most important thing that you can do at this conference is not to attend any session, but to go to the exhibit hall and do your research. I mean it. Even if you can't speak to editors, go up to the exhibits, look at how they've arranged it. See how many old books are there. See how many new books are there. See what they're trying to push for the directions they see folklore is going and what they want to showcase. That's really important. And it used to be when I was at other conferences, I was able to take everyone down to the exhibit hall and start to give you a tour, but that's a long ways away from here, so we can't do that this time. So, anything else? Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Good one.